Hello, friendly neighborhood nerds. If you want to hear interviews from industry pros, get first looks, and have access to endless comic content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell!
What's up, friendly neighborhood nerds? This is Judah Rad, and I'm here with Robo Strange. It's his birthday. He's 40.
Woo! Woo!
And Respawn. Today we have a very... Yeah, that's right. Today we have a very special guest. He's written for Black Mask, Aftershock, Vault, little bit of Valiant, healthy dose of Marvel, and is currently writing Lonely Receiver for Aftershock. And today he's on our show. Welcome to the show, Zac Thompson. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Awesome.
Oh,
Yeah. So we're going to jump right into talking about Lonely Receiver, which we've all read issue number 1, and it's fucking awesome. So I love it. I love where this is going. What I wrote in my script here is that it's delicious, but it feels weird to say that out loud, so I'm not. But
so glad you didn't say it. That's good.
Yeah. But I'm so into it. I'm not saying it's derivative in any way, but the movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson 100% comes to mind. But this is definitely not that. This is almost feels like an unofficial sequel, conceptually speaking, in the sense that it sort of starts where that story ends, where that story actually gets interesting. So right out the gate, we're sort of dropped into the turmoil of codependency, relationship power imbalances, and jealousy. How does this reflect your views on relationships?
Yeah, so to start out, like what you were saying about Her, that's exactly it. Like I saw that movie and I was like, this is the most interesting part of this story. And so like after seeing that in like 2016, that's where I came up with Lonely Receiver. Been sitting on it for a while, trying to like pitch it around. But in terms of like how it reflects my like views on relationships, complicated question. But I was, a couple of years ago, I was in a really horrible marriage, unfortunately, and there was a lot of weird sort of possessive qualities to my ex-wife that sort of colored my interpretation of love and like adult love. And so I really wanted to like talk about that in comics and in storytelling, just because I thought, that's something I don't really see very often, and you certainly don't see it written by men. So I was like, fuck it. I'm going to be the guy who like wades into these very uncomfortable waters and sort of talk about, the drawbacks of like monogamy or not even monogamy, but possessive monogamy, and sort of what happens when people start to treat their partners like they belong to them.
That's right.
And I think that like if we logically think about the way that relationships are progressing with social media and that kind of thing, this isn't that far outside the realm of reason, and I really wanted to kind of explore like codependency, but also our relationship with our phones, and just really get into like, making people descend with a very terrible main character.
Yeah.
who,
Right.
has like almost no redeeming qualities.
So just so you know, it's gonna be at least 2 days before Judah shuts the fuck up that he nailed it with Her. So
Yes.
I appreciate it. I saw his face. He's like, and what he was hiding, what he wanted to do was like, fuck yeah, I got that shit. So as I read the story, so you pretty much answered the question, but I'm going to read it anyway. So I was reading the story. It seems like this tumultuous, cycle of a toxic relationship. And us three, we were talking, in the past, and we've kind of shared some of the really bad toxic relationships and how there's this kind of predictive pattern that goes through it. And then you read this issue 1, and there it all is. This super high, the love bombing, the depression, I hate you, no, I love you. And then what really hit home to kind of nail this was the sex scene. And that one really was that one kind of like hit a little close to home, like yourself with the past ex. And you get to these lows, like anybody watching this is like, what are you doing? Just get out. But then there's like this weird connection with sex that kind of like acts as this Band-Aid, and you kind of like get into it, right? So what I was going to say is I'm reading that correctly. And then that's when you go, yep, sure is, because I just said that 5 minutes ago. But also, what I want to say is at the end, when everything kind of falls apart. By the way, spoilers. When everything falls apart, that's when things get physical. And then that's when the little machine, whatever that little box is, kind of goes boop, and then the AI goes away. Is that intentional? Is that like that's the breaking point? And will we see more of the AI girlfriend that is now gone?
Yes, sort of. The whole thing that I wanted to explore with this was like you guys picked up on it perfectly, where those highs and lows and that love bombing and sort of the like when you're in a toxic relationship, it almost works in cycles where you're like, how many times have we had this fight? How many times have we gone through this bullshit? But then if you're being manipulated or someone's manipulating you, they kind of know how to solve those problems and get out of those messy situations. And so what I really wanted to do was like start the book off with this like main character who seems really sort of like put together and dresses like really brightly, and then like as you start to go down the issue, you're like, oh shit, she's the problem. And not only is she the problem, but she's super possessive. And then in regards to like what you were saying about the phone, the phone's like a weird flesh pod. People have been calling it a ball sack, which I and the whole series sort of like what I wanted to do was like drop people into the middle of the world and sort of not really tell them exactly what is going on. And then as you sort of like take a step back, like issue 2 looks at like the technology of the phone, what that looks like whenever a partner like disconnects. Can you get them back? What does the company have to say about that kind of thing? Okay. And you start to learn more about the way that other people see these things in the world, and that there's like a stigma sort of attached to it. And then from that you get into other people start coming into the story, and you start to see how they are interpreting Katrin, and you start to just expand slowly and slowly and slowly until you get a bigger picture of the world. But I really wanted things to be mysterious at the beginning, because my favorite stories sort of drop you in and have you asking questions going like, holy fuck, what the fuck is going on? But I can't stop reading. I gotta keep going.
Because all the puzzles are, it's kind of like a breadcrumb or the Hansel and Gretel candy trail. Like, no, I need more.
I think that's exactly why... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just want one little quick thing. So it didn't seem like there was much censorship. This is definitely a comic book for adults, right? So especially in the sex scene, I'm like, oh, we're just putting it all out there. Okay, cool, it's that kind. But towards the end, and I apologize for not having the names on hand, but we'll call her AI girlfriend, is getting censored. And there's like these little boxes around her nipples and the genital area. What's the messaging there? Because clearly it's not for the comic book's sake, the reader's sake.
The whole idea is that that's what they look like in reality, that they don't actually, those are like simulated pieces, like simulated intimate pieces. So like when you see them nude, they're just little like nodes that don't actually have anything into them. And so like that's the whole point. That's why she says like, you want me to be a fucking human, and she's standing there and she's got those 3 little black boxes, and she clearly isn't human. We did that on purpose, and you'll start to see more of that going forward too, where you start to see the subtle differences between like what these AIs are versus what actual people are. And I really wanted to sort of like juxtapose that with the sex scene, because the sex scene is so sort of like just you're thrown into it.
That's right.
And like that's only the tip of the iceberg. Like issue 4 is basically one giant sex scene from page 1 to page 20, and we continually tried to push the envelope and see what we could get away with, and every single time Aftershock was like, no problem. So
do it.
It gets fucking crazy.
I need this now. I don't know if I can wait till October.
It's funny when you were saying like I like those stories where they drop you in and you have to sort of pick your way up. That is exactly the feeling that I got comparing it in tone to the Invisible Man movie that recently came out, or the remake from what's his face that did the Saw movies. But he it's the same feeling. Like Yeah, it's. Oh no, not Taika.
No, never mind. Never mind.
Yeah, it's James Wan, I think. So, the uh, the comparison there, I'm starting to understand now that you've given that explanation of like pacing. But it was truly scary for me to read at times, and I say that in a good way. I mean that as a compliment. But most of your indie stuff, which we'll get into later, was also really horrifying to me. So I'm wondering, what you love about horror as a genre.
I think it's an interesting thing to sort of explore the things that make us uncomfortable, or the things that sort of like we want to have conversations about, but maybe, like, for example, as a man who went through like a really toxic and abusive relationship, there's not a whole lot of outlets for me to talk about that sort of experience, because it's just, men don't have the vocabulary, I guess, to sort of talk with you about that kind of thing. And so I was really interested in making a comic about a lesbian relationship that sort of refracted some of my experience in a different way, that people could digest and process this information in creative ways, because I think sometimes it's really difficult to have a hard conversation about those types of things. It's a lot easier to drop someone in the middle of a story, have them invest in the characters, and then go, holy shit, this is toxic, this is bad. And then they'll do that like reflection afterwards. And that's my favorite part about horror, is just like going like, hey, I'm going to write terrible people doing terrible things. And hopefully you're going to walk away from it and go like, oh shit, that was heavy. I have to think about that.
Oh, cool.
Yes.
So it's a confrontation of it. I love that.
Yeah.
Indeed. You're the Zach. You're the second person that we've interviewed who's worked with Jen Hickman. We actually spoke to Tina Horn a while back about SFSX, or Safe Sex. One thing I noticed about her style is she draws intimacy incredibly well. How did you link up with her, and what has that collaboration been like?
First, I'll just say Jen's pronouns are they, them, so they are non-binary officially.
Excuse me. Sorry.
No worries at all. I just wanted to nip it in the bud.
Thank you.
No problem. Jen is amazing. We sort of like had been talking a little bit before Lonely Receiver about maybe finding an opportunity to work together, and then originally there was another artist attached to the project, and it just wasn't like gelling. Like I kind of wanted to push it further into the horror elements, and they were sort of more sort of like a more manga sort of flowery feel, and I was like, I don't know about that. So I reached out to Jen and I was like, look, I want to make something fucking crazy here. It's going to be weird, it's going to be sexy, it's going to be really all kinds of strange. And they were like, fuck yeah. And so I actually ended up rewriting the first issue to suit Jen's style, and from there it just kind of like we gelled really, really well. And they were weighing in on scripts and really helping me sort of hone in on some of the things that like I wouldn't be so privy to just from my own experience. And because it's sort of a more nuanced take on sexuality, we wanted to really make sure that it was inclusive and that it really covered our bases in terms of like providing a more sort of open opportunity for anyone of any sort of sexual identity to come in and identify with this, even though it's about a lesbian couple. I mean, one of them's an AI, so it's already sort of weird and fictional from there, but they were just instrumental in shaping this. And like, not for nothing, but they encouraged me to go further in a lot of places where I was like, I don't know, is this crazy? And they're like, no, let's fucking lean in. So they were great. And like the eyes in the wall with the little like pieces of like salmon skin underneath, like that was all them. And I love it so much. I mean, it's been my profile photo for like a year, and I don't think like awesome. No one knew what it was. And like I kept putting up that photo of the two of them like floating in the garden together, and the eyes are in the background, and people only started noticing 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it made me so happy, because I was like, oh, yeah, those have been there for months and you guys haven't seen that shit. So
yeah they did a great job. It really comes together well, and it's cool, the collaborative aspect regarding the script. I think that really enriches the voice.
So I know Judah's got some Marvel questions that he's desperate to ask, but I have one last question for you, Zach, on this comic before we move on. Can you give us any teasers as to what's coming?
Yeah, for sure. So the book has a really weird structure. I wanted to really play with it like formally. So the first issue takes place during a whole day. The second issue is a week. The third issue is a month. The fourth issue is a year, and the fifth issue is an entire life lived backwards. Yeah, it gets fucking crazy. And we got really experimental with it towards the end, but the idea is that it's, you know, a large meditation on like how long it takes to recover from a breakup. So you're looking at different chunks of time, and yeah, and to Aftershock's credit, like again, that sort of happened after Jen came onto the project. The book was supposed to be just a streamlined sort of like couple days, and then I was like, hey, I'm gonna throw out my entire outline, and this is what I'm gonna do. And Aftershock was just like, hell yeah. So they've been nothing but supportive.
Are there any plans to do like a screenplay? Because I need a 5-part miniseries on this on TV.
I'm working on it right now, actually.
Really?
Excellent.
Man, so awesome.
You heard it here first, folks.
That's right.
You did, yeah.
All right. Nice. That's awesome. So I'm a huge X-Men fan. Huge X-Men fan. I think I've read. I challenged myself a few years ago to like read every X-Men mutant thing ever in chronological order, and it took me almost 2 years. There's so much X-Men out there, but I love it. I love it. One thing I'm kind of exhausted by is like the alternate reality stuff. Just because it's like that's such a recurring plot device with X-Men, like going back to like Age of Apocalypse. Have to say, Age of X-Men did not necessarily change that outlook for me. Did not.
Of course.
Yeah, did not resonate particularly with me. Not saying that it's not good, but it just didn't really didn't work so much for me. When you were writing that, did you know that the whole mutant world was going to be revamped by Jonathan Hickman like shortly thereafter?
No. So that was an interesting thing because we knew. So let me think about what I can say. We knew Hickman was coming on to the X-Men books. The plan was for Hickman to come on to the X-Men books for a long time. Like I think when I came onto cable, they already knew Hickman was coming onto the X-Men books, and that would have been in 2018?
2017. Yeah. 2017
So,
or 2018.
yeah, so it took about a year and a half for that to materialize because, as you know, House of X and Powers of 10, very big story, and it took a really long time for them to kind of figure out what the new direction was. With Age of X-Men in particular, we were sort of just tasked with, hey, they're going to an alternate universe. We don't have a plan whatsoever for what that is. Can you guys come up with it? And can you come up with other books that tie into this? However, I have always had a sneaking suspicion that part of what we pitched was sort of like pared back a little bit because we were getting onto that mutant utopia, mutants belong sort of stuff, but we had no idea what Hickman was planning. All we knew is that he was coming, and so we were kind of scratching at similar things in some of the pitches that we sent, and so we were kind of asked to dial back a little bit.
See.
But yeah, I mean, like in any event, it's still a really interesting opportunity to get to do something like that. The thing is like, I wish that I was writing X-Men books now, simply because there seems to be more opportunity to tell new and interesting stories, whereas we were sort of instructed to keep it pretty confined and pretty self-contained, and there wasn't a whole lot of room for, I'll just say, like, innovation, I guess, in terms of like doing interesting things with characters and changing them and that kind of thing. But, you know, I was at that point only writing comics for like 2 years, Lonnie and I, and so to be tasked with coming up with an entire universe and like 5 tie-in books, I feel like we did a pretty good job given the circumstances.
Definitely. Well, on a much more positive note, I really liked X-Men Black Apocalypse Degeneration.
Oh yeah.
So it's like I can only think of one other POV Apocalypse book, and that's the Rise of Apocalypse from like the 90s. So this is like pretty much I would say the most interesting and in-depth look at Apocalypse. I can't even think of like another time when he was this introspective and vulnerable, except maybe as Kid Apocalypse, which is really a completely different character. How long did you have that idea in your head? What was that creative process like?
That was really cool, actually, because we were sort of like, they kind of came to us and they're like, hey, we're doing this thing, X-Men Black, but we don't really know what it looks like yet, but we want to have a story that sort of connects all of the issues together. And so we were like, hey, if it's all about villains, we would love to write Apocalypse. And our editor, Darren Shan, was just like, hell yeah, if you guys have ideas, like, go for it. And so...
Darren Shan? Not the Darren Shan.
Not the author Darren Shan, but
okay,
there's a Marvel editor who shares the same name, which is I tease him frequently about that fact.
Amazing.
Yeah. So yeah, they were just like, whatever you've got. So we sent 3 ideas, but the idea that was central to all of them was like, this is Apocalypse at his most vulnerable, at his most fearful. Strip him down of everything that makes him so powerful. And we really were adamant that, like, make him go through, like, the survival of the fittest, make him live his sort of mantra. And so they were all for it, which was really cool. Cause, like,
his worldview remains the same.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which is just like, nah, I'm not gonna change. I'm fine.
Really good.
So changing lanes a little bit into Yondu. So in the first issue, you reveal that Saba means father, right? So does that mean that the Saba in Saba Nur means like N father Nur? And if so, do we know what N and Nur mean?
So En Saba Nur, I believe, stands for the enlightened one, but Saba is because it's like Centurion, right? So like the idea would be that Saba in Egyptian would be different than Saba in Centurion. Yeah, so no relation, unfortunately.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So with Yondu, you and Sam, I guess Sam Humphries and Star-Lord, but then you as well were charged with bringing the Yondu most people are familiar with into the Marvel Comics canon, while still sort of respecting the established lore surrounding the original 1969 Guardians team that pretty much nobody really knows about anymore. Nobody remembers, except me and maybe some really old people. It seems like you were going for sort of like a space western approach, which worked out really well. What were editorial's inputs regarding that title, and what would you have liked a little bit more time with it?
I would love to write that book for a while, actually, because I felt like we really were getting started with like the MCU Yondu. We called him Pirate Yondu and the other Yondu 3000, just to kind of keep it like sorted out in your head, because like writing 2 characters with the same name in the same script is a nightmare.
Short hawk, long hawk.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But editorial was super cool. It actually came from Lonnie and I pitched like an original Yondu book, because they were asking us to kind of come into the Cosmic Office after we did X-Men, and they're like, what are you interested in? And I was just actually reading the old Jim Valentino Guardians at the time, and I was like, original Yondu is fucking crazy different than the Yondu that everyone knows. And I was like, I would love to expose people to that character, because there's just a lot of cool things about him that aren't in like modern sort of like sci-fi comics and Marvel. And they're like, well, if you like him, what if you did a thing with 2 Yondus where they meet one another? And we're like, that's crazy, but okay, let's do it. So that's kind of how that was born. It was a collaboration between us and Marvel. And yeah, I kind of wish we didn't kill the original Yondu. I would have really loved to do that, like, buddy cop book, sort of like a Deadpool and Cable for a really long time.
Yeah.
Because there's lots of we had 3 storylines planned, but with the way the direct market is with miniseries, sometimes just you never know what you're going to get.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So
I would
you've
like to see more of that as well.
you produced a few titles with Aftershock, and they're actually relatively new. What is it like working with them? Like, what do you like best about Aftershock?
They've been super great. So, like, after my first book came out with Black Mask, Aftershock sort of just reached out and was like, hey, do you want to come pitch here? And so we sent them a bunch of pitches, and it took a little while to find the right thing, but at this point, they're like basically my home. Like, I have another book coming out with them in early next year, that sort of like kind of builds off of some of the ideas in Lonely Receiver and some of the weird technology, but goes in a different direction. We have Undone by Blood there right now, which we just finished the first arc, and that's going into a second arc next year. And they've just been like nothing but supportive, and in terms of like creative notes and stuff like that, they basically just kind of let us run wild. They were more hands-on towards the beginning, but at this point, like everything in Lonely Receiver, I kept going like, is this, like, are you guys cool with this? And they're like, yeah, that's no problem. And I was like, are you sure? And they're like, yeah, no problem. So it's been a nice thing. Like, after a couple of years, they just completely trust me to sort of run with concepts, and they're there to sort of just help execute your vision, which is really cool.
That's dope.
That is awesome.
So one of the titles that you worked on was Relay with Eric Brumberg and the official IFLC hero, husband, Lord and Savior, Donny Cates. What was that like?
That was interesting because so I've known Donnie for a long time, actually, and Donnie's been super helpful to me in terms of just like reaching out and sort of helping out with opportunities and that kind of thing. But I got a call from Donnie one night at like 1:00 in the morning, and he was like, hey man, I got this crazy thing. He had just got Marvel exclusive, and Relay was supposed to be his next book at Aftershock, and he couldn't do it. So they were like, why don't you come on and basically take my outline, which is already based off of someone else's idea, and revise that and sort of run with the book. The book was originally scheduled to run 15 issues, including the 0 issue, and then got canceled after 5. So I mapped out this huge thing that would have been like a space opera in 3 giant acts, and then because it ended at issue 5, it's just sort of like this big question mark. But it was super cool. It was definitely different than creator owned because I had a lot of the pieces were given to me, and a lot of like the set pieces and the ways that issue ends or issue endings were sort of already set in stone. So it was more so sort of like filling in the blanks. Yeah. But it was good because that was my first comic that I wrote by myself. So that was helpful just in terms of like figuring out sort of where I stood as a solo writer. And to, be perfectly honest, it's a thing that I don't own, and therefore I could take a big risk on it, and if it didn't work out, it didn't matter.
Right. It's not mine. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't actually realize that was your first solo. So you wrote everything with Lonnie before you got to that point, is that right? Wow.
Yes,
so how did you and Lonnie team up to begin with? Sorry to interrupt. I know Judah's got a question lined up.
I was wondering this as well.
Yeah.
We met in film school, actually.
Cute.
We went to the same film school, but this is the funny part about it is we never talked while we were in film school. We walked down the same hallway all the time, and then we met at Emerald City Comic Con. We were both there going down from our same film school, and on the bus coming back, he had a Jeff Lemire Dead Man sketch. And I leaned over and I was like, holy fuck, that's amazing. And then I sat down beside him and we just started talking story. And The Dregs, which is our first book, was my final screenplay at film school, and so
Wow.
I worked on it together and adapted it into a comic, and then we just worked so well together that we just kept doing it.
Oh, that
That's-
makes so much
that-
sense, because so much of your stuff that I've read is so cinematic. Like, there have been so many times where we've been, reading, and we've been like, I wish we could see this on screen.
Yeah.
So that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
That's awesome. So, her Infernal Descent. Sorry, we're kind of jumping around, but we're trying
It's
to.
indies
right,
now. We're in the indies.
Her Infernal Descent, a retelling of Dante's Inferno, kind of updates the themes for a modern audience. Are there any other literary classics that you kind of want to toy with in that regard?
I don't know, because like here, the thing that I thought was interesting about Her Infernal Descent is like we thought there would be a bigger audience for like a retelling of Dante's Inferno, but it's sort of like a thing that you read when you're an English major in university, that kind of thing. And so people, that I'm super proud of that book, but it also doesn't have like the Inferno doesn't really have conflict per se, right? It's just someone kind of going through the motions of the different rings of hell. And so it's a very different type of story than people who are reading comics are used to. And a lot of those literary classics sort of have that bent to them. So like what I've been doing now is like something that I'm currently working on is sort of like if I could update Dr. Faustus for the future, that's what I'm doing. But it's like it's very layered and buried within the text itself, and it's extremely original. But like what the idea was like is what if Dr. Faustus was like a bargain between a man, the devil, and the internet?
Cool.
And that's sort of like what the next book that I'm working on is.
That's very clever.
Yeah, so it's sort of like I don't know, like that retelling was super fun and super cool, and like I would love to do something like that again. But I think it probably would be better suited at a publisher that's sort of like more geared towards the book market rather than like the direct market, just because we saw sort of that change. Because like as soon as we went from Her Infernal Descent to Undone by Blood did so much better than Her Infernal Descent, and they're both great stories, but I understand the DNA of Undone by Blood matches better with what people reading comics are used to, and also has that sort of like internal combustion engine of you're like, oh, I want to fucking read and find out more. But if you know the Inferno, you can pick up issue 1, you already know how our book is going to end, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
all right.
So I've never read the original Dante Inferno poem, but I've listened to the song Dante's Inferno by Iced Earth many times. It's a kind of a metal.
Yeah.
It's like a 16-minute metal song about Dante's Inferno, and it's pretty badass. And I also played the video game. Like, what was that? When did that come out? Like almost 10 years ago now.
You don't need to
must-
read the original then. That's it. That's exactly
Yeah.
their direct.
Also, apparently, Godzilla Goes to Hell very loosely adapts Dante's Inferno. Cool.
Amazing. Hey, speaking of Undone by Blood, I read that this week, and it's brutal and gorgeous, and you've also got this brutal and gorgeous protagonist, right? You've got like Ethel Grady Lane. I want to know, what were you hoping readers would take away from her like very vengeance-driven narrative?
Yeah, so I'll get into a little bit of spoilers in that the whole book is structured as like an interplay between Western fiction and the mythologization of cowboys in the U.S. in particular, and then the reality of the people who try to live those fantasies. We really want to show the juxtaposition between like, here's a young impressionable girl who picks up this book who thinks she's going to be a cowboy, and at every turn she gets her fucking ass kicked because she's not ready for it. She doesn't understand that this is fiction. And I think that like, Bonnie and I talk a lot about mythologization of violence and in media and that kind of thing. And the Western was this sort of quintessential slice of Americana that was like, look, if you want to make things right, pick up a gun and go fucking kill some people, and then everything will be all good. And we wanted to show that in the Western story that like that works out very well, and then in the real world story, it does not work out very well at all. And
Nice.
and that's the. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, it gave me Watchmen vibes at times just because of that juxtaposition you got between. So the main character's reading, for anyone that hasn't read it, the Western, and you get like pages of the Western interspersed with her story. So she's a teenager in the 70s, right? Is it 70s that she said it?
Yeah, 1971.
Yep, nice. And it reminds you of that like comic within the comic that Watchmen has, where it's like that same, hey, look, this is what everyone's focused on in entertainment media. Yeah, it's really, really fascinating to watch that juxtaposition that you've got there. The other one I read of yours from Aftershock, which gave me nightmares. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. The Replacer has one of the scariest scenes that I've ever seen in a comic, and I was trying to explain it to these boys, so spoilers for anyone that hasn't read it. La 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 la, close your ears. There's this cute little boy, and he's hanging out with his dad, and his dad's into like those cheesy 80s action flicks, and he sticks on a Godzilla, and they fall asleep because they're just chilling out, and then he wakes up in the middle of the night, looks over at his dad, and his dad's having a full-on stroke and can't feel his legs, and the child is also seeing this like monster behind his father that's like manipulating him and sucking the life force out of him and stuff, right? So yeah, sorry, just totally spoiled it for everyone. But
well, now you don't need to read the book. It's good. No.
That's right. But because of the like VCR inspired cover, I was like, man, imagine like this as a Del Toro with like the monster type stuff in there, and it made me wonder what your vision would be if it got adapted into screen. Like, what would you want to see?
Yeah, I mean, like, that, to me, I've thought about that a lot, because, like, that's super based on my own childhood. My dad had a stroke when I was 7. I wasn't there in the room whenever it happened, but, so he's still, like, physically and mentally disabled from that, and I really wanted to, talk to kids who sort of went through something similar and sort of, like, give them something that they can look at, because a lot of that is horrible and horrifying. But I really, if I could do something like that, it would be a very, like, it would start as a very Amblin-y, like, Spielberg-y thing, but descend into that Del Toro weirdness, because I think there's something interesting about that sort of, like, juxtaposition of, like, that complete innocence, and then as you start to descend, and, with the reveal at the end of the book, there's quite a twist there, and so I really love that kind of stuff of like showing people what they think they're reading isn't actually what they're actually experiencing, and I think that that's something that Del Toro does super well with his like villains that sort of always evolve or always change, and so yeah, I would love to. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'd love to do something that's like, that classic like 90-minute movie where you get to play clips of other films and stuff that show that education that the kid has, because I think that like we live in an era right now where we're all consuming so much media, and like when I was a kid, I used to watch horror movies like way too early, which is evidence of my work, but like I remember being 7 and my older brother showing me Day of the Dead, where like Rhodes gets ripped apart, and we just watched it on repeat like 3 or 4 times, and I threw up my Kraft dinner because I couldn't handle it. Yeah, and my mom was just like, "What have you done to him?" And I was like, I was never the same. But like, I think that is probably happening to kids more now than ever with the internet and that kind of thing, right?
Accessibility, for sure. Yeah. But the thing is, like, I've got nieces and nephews, and I was there for Father's Day yesterday, and they all watch like ad compilations and weird shit that you're just like, why? On YouTube, kids are weird today. So going back to you and Lonnie, the first thing you ever wrote together was The Dregs. I read that this week too. It is not for the faint of heart. It starts off intense as fuck. So I want to know, like, how did you, like, what was the writing process? Were you like, okay, so I've got this script I've been working on. The first scene, this guy gets ground into sausages, but bear with me. Like, how did that go?
It's the answer. It's the answer to your mom's question. What have you done to him? the dregs. So
Super easy, barely an inconvenience.
Yeah.
I really like. Okay, I'm from the smallest province in Canada, and one of the smallest like cities in Canada. And when I came out here to go to film school, we went to film school in a place called like the Downtown East Side, which is like famous for basically a hands-off approach to drug users. So we have like the dregs as a concept is almost real in the city that I live in, and that like we have like 8 blocks for homeless people just kind of like live on their own. They use drugs and whatever they need to do to get by, unsupervised, and they are not arrested in that area of the city.
do they have safe zones, like safe houses for that?
Yeah, exactly. And we have safe injection sites, and like, but the thing is like, it actually works. That it's as horrifying as it may sound. It's a tight-knit community where they take care of one another.
That's right.
When I moved here, from an outsider's perspective, I did not understand that at all. I was just like, what the fuck is going on here? This is crazy. I was going to school like 3 or 4 blocks away. And then after I graduated school, I started working for Vice as a journalist. And I got to go down there and do work on the Downtown East Side with homeless people, started to get to know them. And then that made its way back into the book, because I felt like where that takes place is sort of based on reality, in that like you have this nice chunk of the city, and then right beside it is like this extremely wealthy neighborhood where they will eat like the nicest food, and like there's long lines to get in, but like across the street there's a guy like overdosing in the park, and like that's your view while you have dinner. And I was like, that's so fucked up. And so I was like, I'm gonna write a story about a city that literally eats its own homeless people. Jeez. And like, and everyone knows, and no one gives a fuck.
Wow.
And I pitched it to everyone, and everyone said no. And then read it and was, fuck yes.
Yeah. It is such a cool. It's just so confronting when you're first opening. You know, the first few pages, you don't anticipate with comics generally it to like launch you straight into that shit. You expect a kind of like warm water going up to boiling type deal.
Yeah.
Like,
Jesus Christ.
Good.
That's dope.
Right.
Did you work on the HBO Vice show, or their?
No.
Okay.
It's funny.
I
was going to ask if you had copywriting experience, just because of the ad work that you put at the end of issue 1 of Lonely Receiver. I was like, I bet you he's done some like journalism or something, and yeah, for Vice, and there you go.
So journalist, copywriter, like I've done so many different things, because I was like, anything that paid me to write, I was going to do. And then now coming back to it, I'm trying to put all that shit back into my comics, because I'm like, well, that's the stuff I used to love about Alan Moore and that sort of metatextual element. So like, you know, when Undone by Blood comes out as a trade, there's going to be prose chapters between every issue of the Western novel. And they're like written old school Western novel style, and like, you know, it upped the size of the trade by like 50 pages, but Aftershock was like, fuck yeah, let's do it. So
hell yeah.
Sorry,
I can't wait. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what was in my head. I was sitting in my, so how I was gonna formulate it was, are you prepared for people who don't like that? And that was just gonna be projection, because
So like the thing that I think about that kind of stuff, because like you're right, like if you come to a comic, you shouldn't have to read that shit to enjoy the story. I think it always should be supplemental. It should always sort of add icing on top of.
That's how it is in The Watchmen.
It really is. I think I bitch about it, but you know the way Alan Moore and Jonathan Hickman and you know the way they kind of put that, it's never like I have to. So that is a plus. It's true. I'll just skip it.
Yeah. Exactly. Right. Like, and that's the thing, is like you want people to have the ability to dive in deeper. Mm-hmm. And the thing for me is like I'm a fucking Wednesday warrior who goes every day and buys a huge fucking stack of stuff, and like sometimes you read a comic for $3.99, you're like, well, that wasn't worth it.
Right.
Like I finished that in minutes, and so like I like to fill it with just extra shit, so it's like you feel like it has value. You feel like your $4 or $5 actually went further and you know, even if you don't read it, you're gonna look at those pages and be like, well, at least they're here.
Yeah, that's true. That's
Nice.
true.
So Zach, we're all nerds, and I'm gonna take a wild guess and say that maybe you're also a nerd in some capacity. The question is, what besides the work that you're doing, not work related, what do you nerd out on? What have you been nerding out on lately?
I've been playing Hollow Knight for PS4 for the first time,
Yes.
which is super fucking good. And
So good.
I just finished playing Tony Hawk. The remake just came out,
Yeah.
and my hands are cramped from playing that for 3 hours right before.
Isn't Tony Hawk like a religious figure up there in Canada? Or...
Yeah.
We all worship him. We all go to half pipe on Sundays.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is the soundtrack still amazing?
It is, but it's like it's definitely I've aged, so like
Yeah.
you know, it's been like what, 20 years, I guess.
That's right. That's what I was worried about. I'm like,
Now I'm like, not for
is it?
me.
Yeah.
But like,
Yeah.
That makes
and
sense.
That's what I was
I've taught myself how to forage for mushrooms, so that's sort of like my
Oh.
new.
Really?
thing.
I heard that's pretty dangerous.
Dangerous. It can be very dangerous.
Yeah, so like it can be. I have like a guidebook that sort of tells you how to identify, how to find out whether or not they're poison. And I just spent like 3 or 4 days camping in the woods and foraging for mushrooms. And like BC in particular, where I am, is really good for edible mushrooms. And I only found one poisonous one and had to wash my hands quite a lot after.
Do you have to do?
Does this book tell you what the good mushrooms are, or?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Amazing.
That's pretty
all
awesome.
Part of the plan.
All right.
In
Hey,
case the tie wasn't a tip off.
that's awesome. So for anybody who doesn't know, Zac Thompson has an excellent blog titled "The Voice in Your Head Is Mine." So go check it out. Check the description. We'll put the link inside there. So a lot of good resources about law enforcement reform and defunding the police. Fuck yes. It's been a tumultuous year for literally everything, the comic book industry included. So, Zach, how do you feel, and there's a follow-up question to this too that these other two don't even know I'm about to ask, but how do you feel the comic book industry needs to improve or change over the following years?
Oh man. So
It's a big question.
okay. I mean, I think the first thing that needs to happen is that publishers need to stop releasing so much, and the stuff that they need to release, they should be supporting more. I think that like having been on like both sides of the aisle, like I worked at a bookstore for a little while where we sold comics, and and I've been a fan, and now I'm a writer, so I've kind of seen the three sides of it. And the interesting thing is a lot of publishers do not support their indie titles in the way that they should be supported. I think that we need books that last more than 5 issues, that are indie books that like allow themselves to go on, and that's across the board with the big two as well. You need books that really, because like some things don't find themselves in 5 issues. Some things don't find their audience until a first trade is out. You know,
Some of the best things take a while to develop.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of merit in some of the stuff that DC's been doing, and that like the Black Label books seem to be really interesting, and they're very like creator driven, and the format is interesting, and that like those giant issues that are oversized, and they're not for everyone, but I think that if publishers get more creative with the things that they put out into the market, rather than just 20-page floppy issues over and over and over again, we're at a kind of inflection point with COVID-19 and the industry, and with Diamond and everything, that people need to start like, I understand that all you need for an IP is 5 issues, and then you can kind of sell it to a movie studio or whatever. But I believe in my heart of hearts that, books need to last longer. They need to be acts of like faith on fans and creators, where you can create something that lasts for a couple of years, where people can really sort of like join you on this big journey. And that's part of the reason that we're doing another arc of Undone by Blood, is because we really want like people who enjoyed the first arc to kind of come on board and go into this like weird crime world with us as we sort of do volumes 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, and say like, you know what, you were so supportive for this first book, like we're gonna keep doing this for a while, but on top of that, we're gonna make every volume of this accessible to people, so you don't have to read the first 5 issues to get in on the ground floor of issue 6 or whatever, because
Nice.
I also think that's a huge roadblock to people where they're like, they just don't know where to start. And I think we need to start making things more accessible and more approachable to people that, you know, aren't bogged down in continuity. I think that's a huge drawback, right? Like, I love the X-Men, but when I tried to explain to my mom who X-Man was, she just looked at me like she was having an aneurysm. You know? Like, it just wasn't good.
I fully agree with you. Like, we talk about this as a trio all the time. I'm known as the indie chick because these two are into the big two. But my biggest frustration is the lore and continuity is like, I can't just read a title and that be it. I have to understand all these other tie-ins to make sense of it, which is really frustrating. Yeah. But I think we should vote Zac for president after that.
Yeah, absolutely. Zac 2020.
Absolutely.
Wait, he was born in Canada, so we got to change the Constitution.
Oh shit,
crazy.
that's right.
Easy. So you could just ignore the Constitution, which
is apparently an option.
Seems to be working out quite well right now.
Yeah, that's right. So here's a follow-up question for you. Kind of changing gears, but still about the comic book industry. If you don't want to answer, it's totally okay. We'll probably edit it out like I never asked this question. But there's been some drama with Greg Land, the artist, and even Greg Kapilov has come out. Are you familiar with this about his tracing and copying? Yeah. What do you as a writer? We were talking with yesterday with Redfmus on our live show that we do on Saturdays, and there seems to be this kind of some writers. To get to the point, he just did the Thor with Donny Cates, and so it kind of made me wonder, how do writers feel working with artists with problematic reputations like that?
So I mean, there's a couple things to keep in mind, right? Like with Donnie's situation, someone says, "Hey, Greg Land's going to draw this book," and Donnie's Marvel exclusive, so like he doesn't really get to say no, right? Whereas if I was approached and someone says, "Hey, we want you to do this book," and Greg Land's going to be the artist on it, I would just be like, "Nah, it's not. I wouldn't do it." Because one, I don't have any fucking respect for the dude. Sorry, but I don't. Two, I don't like his art, so that's another thing where it's like, if I don't believe that I can do something that's fun and excites me, then how the hell am I going to get other people excited?
Right.
And
it's
three,
so egregious.
Yeah, it's terrible. That's the other thing too, is like, I just wish that, I guess what I'm trying to say is that if more people keep saying no to working with them, then eventually they'll stop hiring them, right? And I think that's the only thing that you get, is you get solidarity with everyone, where you kind of come together and you're like, no, this isn't cool, this isn't chill. And like, at the end of the day, it's, the guy can draw. The guy has drawn many books. He does use a lot of photo reference, but it's like, all people are asking is like, maybe don't use photo reference of other comic book artists.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
That's right.
Just don't steal shit.
All right.
Which is a pretty easy line in the sand to draw.
Yeah, that's great.
How did he think he was going to get away with it?
On the cover photo.
On the cover.
That's a level of confidence for someone who's done it for a long time, who just didn't think that they were going to get caught, and or knew that if they got caught, no one was going to give a fuck. Both things are shitty and problematic.
In your opinion, do you think there's a path to redemption? Or is it just like, or is he just in too deep now? Just like, hey, we got to cut it.
I don't know. Because to me, it's like, that's... First, you apologize to Tristan for stealing his shit.
That's right.
But second, I think you start over or whatever. Like, you stop drawing off of reference. But like, to me, I don't know.
I mean, it's even more than reference, right? We're talking about straight up tracing. Like,
Yeah. It always makes me think of Mallrat or Chasing Amy
Yeah.
when they're like, "You're a tracer."
That's it.
I'm a thinker.
So this is the path. This is the path to redemption I envision. Quits comics, goes back to just from the drawing board, draws a couple of comics, gets discovered again as a artist
under a pseudonym.
Also goes through like a serious depression with like a little bit of substance abuse, but then he gets clean. But wait, then someone has to make a movie about it. Then
This is the Aftershock pitch
Yeah.
that we're going to take.
Zac Thompson, thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate your time. Before we let you go, is there anything that you want to talk about? Anything that we didn't dive deep enough on? Something that you want to make sure that our viewers know what's out there and want them to go buy?
No, just if you've got a local comic book store, check out Lonely Receiver 1, which came out last Wednesday, and issue 2 comes out on October 7th.
Awesome. Don't forget to check out the rest of the videos on our playlist. We'll make sure that Zac's blog and links to where you can find it, just in case you don't have a local comic book store near you. We'll put out some links to Comixology or Marvel or wherever. Thank you again, Zac, for coming out. And also, guys, don't forget to wash your hands, wear your mask.
Because you want to and not
Thanks for having me.
because of the threats. Thank you for watching Judah, Robo, and Ree. We talk about comics, movies, and TV. Sometimes we have notable guests, and sometimes it's just us. But we're also cool.